whose error is it anyway? I'm Titus Fortner, Dev Advocate, I'm a Selenium lead. We covered all of this. Been with the Selenium project for 10 years next month, and I've been with Sauce Labs for 8 years. So been around both communities for quite a while. All right. Everyone that uses Sauce Labs is probably familiar with these three results that you get in your dashboard: passed, failed, and errored. Pass and fail is what you send to us at the end of your test, usually with an execute script, sometimes with an API call. The third one, though, is an error, and this is where it could be complete if you don't send us pass or fail, but error is what happens when we don't hear a pass or fail back, and there's an issue. And I've run into several times people having the assumption that if they get an error, it's a Sauce Labs problem, that Sauce Labs did something wrong, and that's why they got an error instead of a pass or a fail. And so this talk is to kind of clear up that misconception because a lot of people think, it's an error. There's nothing I can do about it. This just is a bad situation. And that's not true. Almost all of the errors are things that your code can fix if you understand what's going on. And so the purpose of this is to help you understand what's going on. So rather than go error message by error message, this is how we type the error messages. And this is if you've got a CSM that goes over, that does a periodic review with your team, this is the kind of chart that they'll show for what errors you specifically are getting, what things in your code or in your test results are showing up as errors. But this is everyone in the last 30, I think it's 30 days. It is by 30 days. These are the percents of errors that people get. So let's take a look at the first one there. This 32% of all errors at Sauce Labs is a no new command error. So if you're on the telephone and you're talking to someone, I love this old school ChatGPT generated telephone, but you're on a telephone, you're talking to someone, and all of a sudden they stop talking. And you're not sure if you lost connection, you're not sure if they got distracted by something. How long do you wait before you hang up and try calling again or try figuring out what you're doing next, right? So this is what's going on with the no new command at Sauce Labs. We stopped hearing from the test. We're not sure if they're ever coming back. And so at 90 seconds by default, we're just like, all right, we're just going to stop listening and call this good. Hang up. The intended use for this setting, like being able to adjust this setting, is if you've got something that's going on outside of interacting with Sauce Labs. So say you are going to create a new user. So you, with an API. So you start the session with Sauce Labs, and then you have some API call you're making to create a user. And now maybe when you create that user, and this has happened in the past, right? Like the last company I worked at, when you create a new user, it has to go through a provisioning process. So like there's some message bus that's has to pick up the request and then process something and then do something else before you can actually use that user. Sometimes it's you have to verify the email address or something like that, right? Like there's some communication or something that you have to mock out or you have to satisfy, and it's not instantaneous. So what you do is you create a new user with the API, and then you wait until you verify that that user is there, and then you're getting a token from it and then creating a cookie with that token. So the next thing that Sauce Labs is going to see is this driver get uh, navigation. So between when you started the session and the driver get, the clock is ticking, and if it goes over 90 seconds, this will error out because Sauce Labs is going to be like, I don't think we're going to hear back. Let's stop. So this is the intention. But not everything needs to happen. So not everything needs to happen in the UI because we're doing some API calls here in the background. But this shouldn't be that common that you're going to have to go 90 seconds without talking to Sauce Labs and using Selenium. Um, Usually what we see, so this is what it looks like here on the right. The test did not see a new command for 90 seconds, timing out. Usually what happens though, people see this and I'm like, oh, they didn't get a command in 90 seconds. That must mean I need to increase uh, the value of the timeout. Um, what's actually happening, what's probably actually causing this for most people is that the page hasn't finished loading. If the page takes greater than 90 seconds but less than 300 seconds to load, you're going to get this error and it's going to be a 90-second timeout. People are like, oh, well, it didn't load in 90 seconds. Let's just increase that. Very rarely, if it hasn't loaded with in 90 seconds, is it ever going to load, right? Like you've got other issues if your pages aren't loading in 90 seconds. And so just cranking up that number has other problems though. So for instance, people are like, I've got this brilliant idea. Let's just increase the idle timeout. So instead of 90, let's make it 1,000. And so like I actually ran the numbers of what we actually see in production right now. Almost a third of people increase the default timeout value. And I am guessing 90% of them did that without understanding what they were doing. And probably 10% of them should have fixed it another way than raising this timeout value. Just, yeah. So a couple things to go over when we're talking about timeouts. There's so many different timeouts. Interesting story. The page load timeout by default in the W3C specification and default in Selenium, all the bindings, is 300 seconds. Sauce Lab's general command timeout is 300 seconds. So this is a command that Selenium sends to the driver, and it will wait up to 300 seconds to hear back from the driver before it says, I think the driver's hung up on us. We're gonna cancel out. So essentially the command timeout is between the Sauce Lab server and the driver, where idle timeout is between the Sauce Lab server and the user. So the interesting thing is both the page load timeout and the command timeout are 300 seconds, but the average HTTP client read timeout is only 180 seconds. So that means what you're actually going to see if the page load times out or if a command times out, your code will always show some net read error. It will be some Java or Ruby or Python specific error that makes no sense, completely unrelated to Sauce Lab saying read timeout. And that's because the page load and the command timeout are both much higher than all of the Selenium client default timeout. So the only way to get a page load timeout is to decrease the value in your options or to increase your HTTP client config read timeout value so that it's larger than the other. So this is a problem that we get quite frequently, and it's really hard for Sauce Labs to, because all of the HTTP clients are different, and some of the redirects are different, and some of those things are a little, everything's just different enough that it's impossible for us to provide a nice, seamless experience for everyone. So we end up with confusing things. So your HTTP read timeout, not a Sauce Labs problem. You can fix it by changing your it's probably a page load timeout or a command timeout, and you want to adjust the timeout values so that you know which it is, so you know how to address it. So what I recommend instead of this code here, this do something slow and just wait for everything, when we're doing this wait until, throw in some kind of like just ping to Sauce Labs, let them know you're still online. Like, hold on a second, we're still there. Like the hold music is going and someone comes back on the line and is yes, what one moment, sir, still waiting for the the computer or whatever. I'll be right back. That's what this any driver call is going to do to Sauce Lab. Reset the 90-second timer. In all honesty, in my code, I would probably be dropping that from 90 seconds down to 30 seconds. Because if there's a problem, I don't want it hanging out and waiting and locking up my sessions for any longer than it needs to be when there's an actual problem. And I'm going to manage the timing myself with a call like this if I need anything more than just a few seconds between commands. So how do we fix this though? Like there's an underlying issue in your code when you get this, and that's because Sauce Labs never got a quit command at the end. So there was a problem with your session. There was a timeout, probably a read error in your code, and then Sauce Labs never hears back. And then so we're not able to end the session and you end up with that timeout. So for most hooks, the before hook and the after hook, if there is a problem, if you create the driver in the before hook, but do something before the test and there's an error in there, it won't run the after hook at all. If you're in the after hook and you have a do something after test method before the driver quit and it errors, there's an exception that's not caught, it will never actually execute the driver quit. So it's really important that you make sure if there's a problem somewhere that you're quitting the driver. So in your start hook, make sure that you are catching the whatever happens after you've initialized a driver and make sure you can quit it. In your stop, if you're doing something in the after hook, but before you quit the driver, make sure that it's always quit. And then, again, you can verify, make sure it's not null, and then quit it. Something along those lines. But this is how you make sure that you're reporting back to Sauce Labs that things are good. And the final thing is sometimes the driver itself has been the driver. So even if the driver at Sauce Labs is not working, you still want to send this quick. If you send this quick command to Sauce Labs will see that the message things are over. It will try to send the quick command to the driver, and even if the driver's in a state that's not accepting new commands, Sauce Labs still knows to quit the session. So you always want to send this driver quit. If you want to be especially thorough, which I do in my code, I actually use a REST call, an API client to send a stop command to the session ID at Sauce Labs API. So this is by far the biggest issue that we see. Literally, no one should ever need to get this error. There's a way to fix it every single time. So if you're seeing a bunch of these, please figure out how to dig into your code and either loop where necessary, reduce that default timeout down to as low as you can get away with so that you're not running into problems, and then make sure absolutely that you've quit the driver and that you've told Sauce Labs that it should not expect to hear back from that session. All right. Yeah, and this is the API. In most of our sauce most of the sauce most of the Selenium languages have an API wrapper of some sort. Java is the one that's probably the best maintained right now, and you're essentially passing in the session ID and you just call in the stop method, and that makes sure that Sauce Labs knows absolutely, even if there was a connection problem, this session is done. All right. The next most common thing is tunnel related. This is the tunnel, like mostly this is the tunnels down when they're trying to execute things. We have a high availability mode for Sauce Connect. And if you're running into these errors, please figure out what you need to do with the Sauce Connect high availability. Let us know, talk to us about setting something up. But the idea is that you have two always on servers, Sauce Connect instances running, so that if one goes down, another is available to take the calls, and they're always on in a way that anytime you run a test, you can have high confidence that the thing you need to interact with is there. It's possible that there's also setting issues causing this somewhere. Um, and often we see this in batches where like something's down, there's some problem, and then you get a whole bunch of them, and then you fix it, and then you don't see it again for a long time. But even that's annoying, and you don't want to be in a position where you have to get any tunnel errors. And so figuring out your setup and making sure it's robust and resilient is very important. All right, third most common is misconfiguration. We have this fancy tool called the platform configurator. It's really great. I actually did a lot of work myself fixing up some of this in the background, but this should give you the exact thing that you need to use in your code. And one of the problems with some of this is, Windows, like, you have to know the exact specific string to pass in for these things. So like it has to be capital W and it has to have a space, and like that's a magic string, we call it, right? And there's magic strings for a lot of things through the configurations. And so just making sure that you have the right thing, making sure that the combination, and also you can kind of get in trouble with some of these if you've got, a bunch of conditionals. You might accidentally add one thing into a build configuration that doesn't apply. So again, just making sure that your startup code works, you can fix all of these misconfiguration issues by making sure that what you're trying to do is the right mix of things available according to our platform configurator. And this is at, you can see this at, app.saucelabs.com. There's a little platform configurator link on the side, and we'll show you this fancy tool. All right. Next, we have the user terminated and the reached concurrency limit. So we put these in two buckets, but I looked at them and they're actually the same thing. What's going on is we have a queue, and this is kind of a misnomer to a certain extent. We've called it a queue. People at Sauce Labs have called it a queue for a long time, and I've encouraged sales reps to like not talk it up as like, we've got this amazing queue that will manage all of your stuff. It's more like a buffer. The idea here is you're in a queue waiting for the session to run. And if it hits a certain, and what Sauce Labs does, if you've sent, like, and people will do this, people will run in parallel all of their tests, even though they've only got 10 sessions available, right? Like, so some of these small companies that only buy 10 VM, 10 sessions, but they have like 1,000 tests, and they'll try to run all 1,000 at the same time. Only 10 are running. The next 990, what we're going to do is we're going to hang on to that open HTTP request. And then after a certain period of time, I forget the current value. I think we upped it from 30 seconds to a minute. I don't remember, but after a certain amount of time, we're going to send back to the HTTP client in your CI or your computer a redirect message, a 301. So we'll just redirect back to Sauce Labs. So we'll loop it back, and then your code will send back to us the another request, and we'll juggle that. Now, each HTTP client has a limit on how many redirects that it can manage. And some of them, like I believe Python, it's especially low. So you're more likely to get an HTTP error in Python, for instance, because it doesn't allow enough redirects. Or after 10 minutes of juggling this back and forth with you, Sauce Labs is going to say, this is too much. We can't keep doing this, and we'll stop it on our end. So, and this image here is, you get to the front of the line, it's like, nope, you got to go back and get to the back of the line, and so you end up with this big long thing. And we just really recommend that you find there's a number of different strategies for how to minimize your concurrency. And we actually probably should do an office hours about this in the future. Maybe I'll do that as my next office hours. But there are a bunch of ways to manage your concurrency to make sure that you are not sending more requests than Sauce Labs is able to easily manage for the amount of concurrency you have in your account. Automation server error. Turns out this is just a command timeout. We talked about that earlier. There is something, it might be a page load, it might be something else, but we send a message, the Sauce Labs server sends a message to the driver and then never hears back from the driver itself. So something hanged, something was an issue. Usually this is a problem with the application under test. Usually this is some kind of a network issue or something that when Sauce Labs pulls the assets from your network, something's hanging, something's not working. And you get a command timeout if it takes longer than 300 seconds. So if it's greater than 90 but less than 300, you're going to get the no new command, or the idle timeout error that we talked about, the 90 seconds. And if it's greater than 300 seconds, then Sauce Labs is going to be like, okay, we're gonna call it quits on our side and send a message. But you are not going to see this either because your HTTP client already hung up after 180 seconds. So whether it's a no new command or a command timeout, it's you're never going to see that specific error in your code because your code has quit before you give Sauce Labs a chance to reply with that. All right, exceeded maximum duration. This is a small number of our errors are this. By default, we give you 30 minutes to run a test. And we absolutely have had people that are like, I want to run 5 hours of tests in one session, all in one go. Based on the data we have, tests that are running less than 2 minutes are twice as likely to pass as tests that are running greater than 7 minutes. And it's it's nice to see that most of our customers, almost 80%, average less than 2 minutes in their tests, which is absolutely great. So yes, please figure out how to break up your long-running tests into shorter atomic autonomous tests, and that will improve your pass rate. It will give you more information about what's failing and why, and is generally better for everyone. Infrastructure and internal server errors. So if you get any of the errors in these two types, which is about 6% of our errors, yeah, that's us. That's us. Our server had some issue. There was something in our infrastructure. We have dramatically decreased what this is. In my time at Sauce Labs, these used to be a much bigger deal 8 years ago than they are today. We've gotten very good at minimizing how many of these we see. Because we realize this is 6% of all errors that are reported, and the percent of errors that get reported isn't that high to begin with. So we have a very high reliability with our configurations. All right, now we are in the questions phase.